video, we'll be looking at network access to storage account, how to secure our storage account when it comes to network. And we are going to be talking about private endpoint. So before going into the lab, let's first of all try to have an understanding what private endpoint is all about. So I'm going to quickly share my screen. So the first thing we are going to look at is what is private endpoint. Then we are going to look at why private endpoint is needed. Then we are going to look at how to create and use private endpoint. So what is private endpoint? Private endpoint in Azure provide a secure connectivity between resources inside a virtual network and Azure services. So this private endpoint enable access to Azure services such as Azure Storage, Azure SQL database, and more through a private IP address within the virtual network, thereby keeping traffic off the public internet. So a private endpoint is used to put a storage account on a private IP address. So a private IP address can only be used on a private network and not the internet. So to access the private IP, you either need to be on the same network or have a virtual private network, that's a VPN, connected to the private network. Then we are going to look at why a private endpoint is needed. First, for storage account with Azure File Share Port 445 is used. And most at times, the internet service providers block port 445 on the internet. So we make use of private endpoint. And the last point we are going to look at before going into the lab is some customers don't want their storage account accessed by the public IP address. So for this reason, they make use of the private endpoint. So we are going to move into our Azure portal, and we are going to see how to create a private endpoint. So in this lab, we are going to create a virtual network. Then we are going to create a storage account with a private endpoint. Then after creating a storage account with a private endpoint, then we are going to create a virtual machine. Now, this virtual machine is going to be connected to the virtual network that we have created. And after creating a virtual machine with our virtual network, then we are going to look at how to access the storage account from the virtual machine. So let's jump into the lab. So the first thing we are going to create is the virtual network. So to create a virtual network in the Azure portal, you can search for a virtual network. So this is virtual network. Under the virtual network, click on create. We have the subscription, then the resource group. I'm going to select my resource group. But if you do not have a resource group, you can go ahead and you click on create new. Then you define the name of the resource group. Then you click on OK. A new resource group will be created, which is going to be used for this resource. We know a resource group is a container of resources. So once we have the subscription and the resource group, then we proceed to create the virtual network by putting the name. So I'm going to put the name as, let me put it as storage-vnet. Then I'm going to use the East region. Then I'll click on next, which is the security side of it. For the security side, I'll leave everything as it is. Then I'll click on next under the IP address. Now, under the IP address, I'm going to first of all delete everything. So I'm going to delete the address space. Now, there is no way you can create a VNet without an address space. So the first thing is to add an IPv4 address space. So if I click on add an IPv4 address space. This is the address space 10.0.0.0/16, and we have the default subnet. And this is the address space. Then there is no subnet, so I'm going to go ahead and I'll add the subnet as well. So I'll click on add a subnet. So when you click on add a subnet, it's going to open a box on the right hand side. Then the subnet purpose default. Then the name, I'm going to change the name from default and I'll put subnet E. This is the IP address range. So we're going to maintain the IP address range. Then we are going to leave the starting address as 10.0.0.0. Then the size /24, that's the subnet mask. Then the subnet address, it ranges from 10.0.0.0 to 10.0.0.0.255. Then once the name has been defined, the IPv4 address range, I'm going to go ahead and I'll click on add. I'll click on add. Once it has been added, so we have the address piece, then we have the subnet A. I'll go ahead and I'll click on review plus create. Then you click on create. There we go. Deployment is in progress. It will take some few seconds. All right. Deployment is complete. So you click on go to resource. Once you click on go to resource, this is our virtual network. We have the address piece. We have the subnet. And if we look under the connected devices, we are going to realize no device has been connected to this network. So the next thing we are going to create is creating a storage account with a private endpoint. That's the next thing we are going to create. Create a storage account with a private endpoint. So I'll go to a new tab and I'm going to create a storage account. So let me come back to this tab. I'll click on the three horizontal and I'll go to storage account. Under storage account, I'm going to create a new storage account. So I'll click on create and I'll select the same resource group with my virtual network. That's the resource group. Then I'll give the name as it is a unique name. I'll put it as Yandtech Store 318. I'm going to use the region East US. For the performance, I'm going to use standard. Then for the redundancy, I'm going to leave it as default, Joe redundant storage. I'll click on next, which is the advanced. I'm going to leave the advanced as it is, leave everything by default. Then I'll click on next, which is the networking. Now the networking phase is an important phase when it comes to this part, creating a storage account with a private endpoint. So I'm going to disable public access and use private access. That's why we use a private endpoint, right? Disable public access and use private access. So under private access, once you click on disable, you will see private endpoint. So we are going to click on add private endpoint, but you see under private endpoint, there's a short description. Create a private endpoint to allow a private connection to this resource. So I'm going to click on add private endpoint. Under the add private endpoint, that's my resource group, that's my subscription, that's the location. Then I'm going to define the name for this private endpoint. I'm going to put it as private endpoint. I'm going to put it as private endpoint. Under the storage sub-resource, I'm going to leave it as blocked. So I'm going to maintain the block. And under the networking, we created a virtual network. So I'm going to select the virtual network. This is the virtual network that we created, storage VNet. And under the storage VNet, there was a subnet, which we named as subnet A. So I'm going to select subnet A. And there we go. So once we have defined the private endpoint under the storage VNet and the subnet the subnet as well. We now proceed to click on OK. So I'll click on OK. Once we click on OK, we are going to realize the private endpoint has been added. So I'll go ahead and I'll click on Next, which is data protection. Leave everything as default. I'll go ahead to click on Review plus Create. Then I'll click on Create. It will take some few seconds for the deployment to be complete. Once the deployment is complete, then we are going to go into the resource for us to connect the storage account, or for us to gain access to the storage account through a virtual machine. We are going to first of all copy the access key. I'm going to show you all on how to copy the access key inside the storage account. All right, so deployment is complete. Click on Go to Resource. Once you click on Go to Resource, for us to look at the access key before creating the virtual machine. So if you scroll down on the left-hand side, under Security plus Networking, you are going to see access keys. Under the access key, from the description, you will see access keys authenticate your application request to this storage account. So keep your access key in a secure location like the Azure Key Vault. There's a lab coming up for Azure Key Vault. So if we look at the access key, we see key 1 and key 2. So we are going to copy one of the keys, key 1. I'm going to copy key 1. I'll go to the notepad, I'll paste it somewhere. Okay. So that's the access key we are going to use. So now we have the access key. The next thing we are going to create is a virtual machine. So to create a virtual machine, I'll go to the three horizontal lines and I'll click on virtual machine. I'll click on create Azure virtual machine. Then I'll select the same resource group I use in creating the virtual network and the storage account with the private endpoint. Yandtech resource group. Then under the virtual machine, I'm going to give a name of my virtual machine. So I'm going to put this as storage dash VM for the virtual machine. Then under availability option, I'm going to change from availability zone and I'm going to use no infrastructure redundancy required. Then for the image, I'm going to change from the Ubuntu server and I'm going to make use of Windows Server 2022 Data Center, the Azure Edition, x64 Gen 2, Generation 2. So I'm going to use this guy. Under the size, we leave it as default, standard B to S. Then under the username, I'm going to define my username, Yandtech. I'm going to change that password. Okay. And I'm going to confirm the password. Once confirmed, under the inbound port row, we know to connect to a Windows virtual machine. We need port 3389 RTP to remotely connect into that Windows machine. So I'll leave it as it is. Then I'll click on next, which is the DIX. I'll leave the DIX as it is. I'll click on next. Networking. By default, it is going to pick up the virtual network we created. So you see, this is the virtual network we created. Storage VNet. We have the subnet. This is the subnet E. And in the course of creating the virtual network, public IP address is going to be created, a network security group as well. So once the name of the virtual network is there, then the subnet is there. We go ahead and we click on management. We leave management as it is, monitoring as it is, advanced tasks. So we proceed and click on review plus create. So once we click on review plus create, we click on create, and it's going to take some few seconds again for the deployment to be complete. Deployment is in progress. All right, there we go. Deployment is complete. So I'll click on go to resource. This is my virtual machine. The next thing we are supposed to do is for us to connect to this virtual machine. So for us to connect to the virtual machine, I'm going to click on connect. I'll click on connect and I'm going to download the RDP file. So I'll download the RDP file. That's the RDP file. It has been downloaded. I'll click on it. I'll click on connect. It will bring us to the Windows security, asking us for the authentication. So I'll click on more choices and I'll click on use a different account. Then I'll put the username as created in the deployment of the virtual machine. Then I'll put a password. And I'll click on OK. You click on yes. And there we go. We are connected to the virtual machine. So this is our Windows Server 2022 virtual machine. Loading up the profile. Okay, this is the virtual machine. It's still loading. All right, click on yes. For the network, the server manager, still loading. So I can go ahead to minimize the server manager. And the next thing we are supposed to do first is we are going to run a command to test the connectivity of the storage account. So the command we are going to run, let me bring up the note. Let me bring up Notepad so I can write the command. All right. Notepad, and the command we are going to use is the ns lookup. Then we are going to define the name of the storage account. So if I minimize and I go to storage account to look at the name of the storage account. All right, this is the storage account I created. All right, this is the storage account. So let me copy the name and I go back to my virtual machine and I'll paste it here. Okay, and we are doing it for the endpoint, for the blob endpoint, and we know the blob endpoint is blob.core.windows.net. There we go. ns lookup, the storage account follows with the blob endpoint .blob.core.windows. So I'm going to copy this command. Then I'll go to search on the virtual machine and you search for PowerShell. Then you run PowerShell as the administrator. So you search for PowerShell, you right click and you click on run as administrator. Run as administrator. Then I'm going to paste the command. Then I'm going to enter. There we go. So we have the IP address. We have the public IP address. You see private link.blob.core.windows.net. So that's the first verification. You see public IP address, and this is the name, and then we have the alias. So after doing this verification, we are going to now connect to our storage account, making use of the Microsoft Azure Storage Explorer. So we are going to use that application to connect our storage account. So for us to do that, we need to download and install the Azure Storage Explorer. So I'm going to search for Edge browser. I'm going to search for Microsoft Edge browser. Confirm, continue. Continue without this data. All right. So open a new tab and I will search for Microsoft Azure Storage Explorer. So click on the download. I'll click on Azure Storage Explorer. Give me a minute. Let me go out of this link. Let me use the second option. Okay, there we go. So download Azure Storage Explorer. We see download now. So I'm going to click on the drop arrow. If you are making use of a Windows operating system, use the Windows. MacBook, you select Mac. If it's Linux, then you go ahead. But now we created a virtual machine running Windows Server 2019. So we are supposed to download under Windows. So I'm going to click on Windows. There we go. We see the download. Once it has been downloaded, we are going to start the installation. So I'm going to click on the Storage Explorer to begin the installation phase. All right. So there we go. I'm going to install for me alone. That's the recommended. I'm going to accept the agreement. I'll click on install. I'll click on next, next. So after the installation, then we are going to look at how to connect, how to gain access, and also how to connect our storage account. So that is it. Finish. Check this box. So once you click on finish, it is going to launch the Microsoft Azure Storage Explorer. So you click on finish. Okay. So this is it. We have Storage Explorer. But before we go ahead to connect, in our virtual machine, we are going to turn off the IE enhanced security configuration. So to turn that off, if I minimize Storage Explorer and I go to Server Manager, this is Server Manager. I'll click on Server Manager. I'll click on Local Servers, Local Server. Under Local Server, we are going to see IE Enhanced Security Configuration, which is on. So we are going to turn this off. So to turn it off, you click on. Then you see for the administrator, we are going to put it as off. So under this guy, Internet Explorer Enhanced Security Configuration, it reduces the exposure of your server to potential attacks from web-based content. All right, so we are going to turn this off and I'll click on OK. So once it has been turned off, so you see, we have off right now. So once this guy has been turned off, so I'll go now to my storage Explorer. And for us to connect our storage account to Storage Explorer, I'll click on the dialog, the third option. I'll click on the dialog and I'll click on Storage Account or Service. We have different methods. We have the connection string. We have the share access signature URL. Then we have the account name and key. We are going to use the third method. You click on account, name and key. Then you click on next. Then it's going to ask you for the display name, the account name, and the account key. So the display name is the name of the storage account. The account name is the name of the storage account. Then the key, remember, in the course of creating this, I told you guys to copy the access key, right? Which is key 1. So if I go, I can minimize this virtual machine. If I go to my storage account under access key, you are going to see the name of the storage account. So I can copy the name. I go to my virtual machine and I paste it under display name. I also paste it under account name. Then under the key, we have key 1 and key 2. Under key 1, we have key. I'll click on show, then I'll copy the key and I'll go back to my virtual machine and I'll paste it under Storage Explorer under account key. So I'm going to paste it there and that is it. And I'll click on next. Once you click on next, then you will see the summary and I'll click on connect. And there we go. So we have successfully connected our storage account to the Storage Explorer, making use of a default, making use of our VNet. So we created a VNet, then we created a storage account with a private endpoint. So we are making use of a private IP address, not a public IP address. So all the process we have done so far was through the private IP address. So this is my storage account. If I load, you will see the block container, you will see the file share, you will see the queue, and you will see the table where I can go further to create a block. So if I click on block container, so you see we have block container, we have queues, we have tables. So that is it. So this lab is going to help you to do network access when it comes to storage account, to secure your storage account from the public and make use of private endpoint. So there are many ways in which we can secure our storage account. So we just look at one of the ways by making use of a private endpoint. So we are also going to see a video where we are going to look at another way to secure our storage account, making use of service endpoint as well. We have service endpoint, we have firewall. So go through the video and make sure you succeed. If you have questions, you can reach out to me using the chat box. Thank you for watching this video. Please subscribe, like, and also click on the notification button for more videos, more educative videos that's going to help you to build your career. God bless you.